to present her bill? If not,
I have communicated with her. I don't know if she's in yet or not.
okay, Delegate Williams-Graves, are you with us?
Good morning.
Oh, there she is. Welcome.
I've been feeling like I've been stuck in the corner all morning.
No. You're good. You're with us. Welcome, and tell us about HB 2291.
So good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the members of the subcommittee for hearing my bill. The purpose of House Bill 2291 is simply to correct an oversight. It is basically to add or amend Section 99.1-601 as it shall become effective in the Code of Virginia, and allowing the governing body of a locality to remove the exception of deputy sheriffs from the supervision of oversight boards. It's very interesting that this bill comes up after the last bill with Delegate Hope, because that bill was all about oversight. And it was all about making sure that everybody was doing the right thing. And one of the statements that made so much sense to me was that when the government has control of someone's life, then there should be oversight in how the government acts. And so when a governing body has the ability to take life or to severely injure or harm someone, then they too should have oversight. I want to make a point to say that we have a lot of good sheriff's deputies, and that I am not lost on the fact that law enforcement does and has a very difficult job. I mean, by its own nature, law enforcement is designed to basically catch bad guys, right? And bad women, right? And they're designed to catch the bad people. And they're supposed to keep us safe from bad people. But there are times when that power is over exercised. There are times when that power is overutilized, and there are times when that power is abused. And historically, in the African American community, as well as in other minority communities, there has been a mistrust between law enforcement and the community. And so simply by adding sheriff's deputies who have policing authority, who have the ability to put someone, to take someone into custody and to arrest them, and who have the ability, by virtue of the weapon that they carry as part of their standard issue to do their job, that weapon will take a life. By adding them to this oversight ability that localities have, I believe that it will further foster trust. It will give citizens input into what goes on, and it will also help to provide understanding between citizens' concerns and issues with law enforcement, and law enforcement being able to work with citizens and helping them to understand what they have to do. There's also one last point in that there are several individuals who oppose, as well as those individuals who support this bill. There's also the provision for removing, if I'm not mistaken, for removing law enforcement from the civilian oversight committee. That committee or review board would be strictly of citizens. So with that, I welcome any questions, and welcome the responses of those who are here to voice their opinion.
Thank you, Delegate Williams-Graves. Delegate Rasool, did you have a question? I don't know if his hand's up from before. Delegate Rasool, did you have a question?
No, sir.
Okay.
Left over, sorry.
Take your hand down, please. All right, Delegate Robinson, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is beyond me and it may be beyond the delegate. So I don't know who has the answer to this question, and it may be someone in who's going to testify. Why were the sheriff's office and the deputies exempted in the past on this? There had to be a reason that they were exempted. So could somebody explain that to me, please?
And Doug Williams-Graves is new to the General Assembly, but I think someone else may have an answer. But Doug Williams-Graves, do you want to take a first crack at it? Otherwise, Chairman Hope, I think, wants to answer the question. You
Well,
can look to him.
Yeah, I can tell you what I've been told.
Okay.
And Delegate Hope can either corroborate that or add something else to it. What I have been told is that because the sheriff's office itself is a constitutional office and is an elected office, that it was removed because oversight is in elections every 4 years. And so my response to that is, well, that may be true, but a new sheriff doesn't come in and just wipe out his whole department of deputies who may be bad actors. While they can, they usually don't. And so just changing a sheriff does not simply change the culture in a department. It doesn't change the bad actors in a department, and it doesn't, it may change some accountability factors, but those bad actors that are on the street policing, especially in the localities, and that's a part that I want to make clear, especially in the localities where the sheriffs are the police. I come from a locality where we have a police chief, we have a great police chief, and we have a sheriff, and we have a great sheriff. The sheriff is in charge of jailing, and they're in charge of civil process, and our police officers are the catchers of the bad guys. And so that's the difference. But that's what I've been told, is that because they're constitutional officers, that they should be exempted.
Chairman Hope, did you want to add anything to that?
The only thing I would add is that the House, this committee passed legislation that included sheriffs, and it wasn't until it went over to the Senate was it watered down. And I just think that from my own jurisdiction, I know Delegate Levine and it sounds like Delegate Williams-Graves. I mean, we've got law enforcement, police officers, police department, and we've got a sheriff's. And you would have one agency within the same city or county that has it, and another other agency doesn't. Makes absolutely no sense to me. And I would imagine most of these internal issues, whether it's misconduct or misuse of force, are all dealt with internally. I don't know how the public would ever know about it. So I know they're concerned about the election and how someone might be mischievous and want to harm the sheriff in some election, but the public probably doesn't know about any of these infractions at all. This is the only way to bring in some light, shine some light and accountability and transparency in the whole process, and let the public decide.
Okay, we have 6 witnesses that are for this measure and one, John Jones, who is opposed. Why don't we go through our witness list and then continue our discussion? It is still my hope this bill and Delegate Corey's bill this morning. If we have to, we can push Delegate Corey's bill off to the afternoon. I know she would not like that. So let's see if we can try to wrap this up. But if we do want a full and fair discussion, let's go to Sean Winnetka. We'll have 1 minute for each witness, please, Mr. Clerk. We'll give John Jones a little bit more since he's opposed, and the other 6 are for. But 1 minute for each of our witnesses for this. It's Sean Winnetka, again, of the Humanization Project of Fairfax. Mr. Winnetka. Are you with us, Mr. Winnetka? May have left after our other bill. Is Miss Jen Carter there of the Humanization Project? I think he said that she was not there, but Ms. Jen Carter or Mr. Winnetka, either one of you with us?
No, sir.
All right, let's move on to Mr. Vishal Agraharkar of the ACLU of Virginia, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of the ACLU of Virginia, and in keeping with our support of civilian oversight over law enforcement agencies, we do support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Let's go to Mr. Dylan Bishop of the Virginia Law Enforcement. Got to get the full name here. The Virginia Law Enforcement Sheriffs.
Yes, sir. We're actually signed up to speak in opposition to this measure, and I'd be more than happy to yield my time.
All right, I'll go back to you. I promise. I want to
Yes,
hear
sir.
from Mr. Richard Walker of Bridging the Gap in Virginia. Mr. Walker.
Yes, Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, it's about accountability. It's about with all of the outraged incidents that we had throughout the country. It's about accountability, not only in indoors in the prisons, but also on the streets. Those that are paid to protect and serve the citizens, as well as catch the bad guys. It's time, and I'm grateful for this session that a lot of bills that are addressing criminal justice reform are happening. So, and this would be an additive measure for that to continue on in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Let's hear from Gayleen Knoyton of the Virginia State Conference NAACP. Ms. Knoyton, welcome back.
Hello?
Yes, Ms. Knoyton, are you with us?
Okay, here we go. I'm sorry. Yes,
No
I'm Gayleen Knoyton. I'm the Virginia State Conference NAACP Political Action Chair. We are strongly in support of this bill. We advocated for the expungement bill during a special session to include the Sheriff's Department, merely to have an excuse to not include the Sheriff's Department because they're voted in is just unacceptable. The Sheriff's Department, there's no gray area in misconduct by a sheriff's department if it was to occur, and to wait another 4 years for them to be judged or voted in or out is unacceptable for us. So we strongly support her bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Knoyton. All right, let's go now to Dylan Bishop of the Virginia Law Enforcement Sheriffs, who opposes this legislation. Mr. Bishop, welcome.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for having me this morning. Like you said, my name is Dylan Bishop. I have the privilege and honor of representing the Virginia Law Enforcement Sheriffs, and we'd ask you to oppose this bill. The reason why is, like the patron mentioned, there is oversight for our constitutionally elected officers and their deputies, and that's the public election that occurs every 4 years. However, I did have an opportunity to speak with Chairman Hope on this matter. Unfortunately, I've not had the opportunity to circle back with the patron, but I plan to in short order. And what I think this legislation is getting at is public accountability for our sheriffs and their deputies. And that's something that we are in favor of, but I think there's a better means of doing so. We would offer an alternative measure, and that would be to make misconduct and misuse of force records publicly accessible through FOIA. We think that would be a better means of getting the public that accountability and accessibility to information to ensure that the bad actors are getting weeded out of the system. And the reason why I think that's a superior path to this accountability is that you don't have law enforcement officers under the jurisdiction and authority of folks that have no understanding of what it takes to be a law enforcement officer, no training in law enforcement, and no understanding of the pressures and circumstances that these men and women often find themselves in. So I would encourage the body, and I look forward to circling back with the patron, and I hope we can have a good and honest discussion about an alternative means of getting to this important level of public accountability with our law enforcement officers. So thank you for your time, Mr. Chairman.
I have a question for you, Mr. Bishop. Delegate Hope, Chairman Hope pointed out, and it's true, that we now have civilian review boards for police. We have them in all the localities I represent, Alexandria, Arlington, and Fairfax. Maybe you don't like those, I don't know. Maybe you think those civilian review boards, those civilians are not capable. But why should, if we have them for police to have oversight, why can't a similar system work for sheriffs and deputy sheriffs?
But to speak frankly, I don't believe that's the best system of bringing accountability to our police force, but I only represent the law enforcement sheriffs. So I didn't want to speak on that because it does not affect them, at least at this point in time.
Okay, let's go to John Jones, the Virginia Sheriff's Association. John, welcome to our subcommittee. I consider you a friend. I'm not sure I agree with you on this one, though, so make your best case.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to the members of the committee and to Delegate Graves. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Let's talk about the difference between this bill and what it would do for sheriffs and what it does to police. And I'm trying to make my comments in terms of where the discussion has been going. There's a major difference. The locality under the bill currently, under the law currently, has the option. They don't have to do this, to have a civilian review board for their police. In fact, they could have done it without the bill. Now, with this bill coming along, you'll have a locality, a local governing body, for the first time in history, appointing an oversight non-elected committee to supervise the actions of an elected constitutional officer. And you know, you're talking about oversight, but what you'll end up with these committees is, you know, by the nature of an elected sheriff, they don't always get along with their local governing body. And so what we'll have are people getting and clamoring to get on these committees that are running for sheriff. So if you have a sheriff in office and you have some members of the local governing body that don't necessarily care for that sheriff, and it may be political differences or whatever, but the sheriff and the local governing body have been elected, it'd be very easy for someone that wants to run for sheriff. Now they're on the committee, and they're under this code, they're being given supervisory responsibilities over deputies under the elected sheriff. So the result will be much different. You know, these citizens that get appointed are not vetted. The current law doesn't have an exemption for FOIA. So you could have people on this committee, and this goes for the police too, that are now have access to sensitive information that is not otherwise FOIAble. The Sheriff's Association looked at this bill over the summer. We promised a number of legislators we would try to come up with something that would address the issues being brought by the proponents of these bills.
10 seconds.
So
you
we
can have more time, Mr. Jones. Go ahead.
So we have a review every 4 years and a review every day. Deputies are at will. It's not just every 4 years, but the sheriff gets elected every 4 years. And as you know, you're not just looked at every 2 years, you're looked at it all the time, and sheriffs are too. Criminal complaints have a remedy. You've got grand juries, you've got the state police, you've got the local law enforcement, you've got the federal agencies. And what we found from the summer session, the summer reform session that we supported, if a person has a complaint on a civil violation, they can now go to the Virginia Attorney General and it will be investigated and a remedy can be forthcoming.
Do you have an alternative proposal, Mr. Jones, for oversight?
I'm sorry.
Do you have an alternative proposal for oversight of the sheriffs?
Yes, I think the General Assembly addressed that when they passed two bills in the special session that allows for the first time the Attorney General to investigate civil violations in all law enforcement agencies, including sheriffs, and to file suit for remedy. So that's a great alternative. Let's see how the Citizen Review Board works for the localities, but this is not a good fit for a constitutional office.
Okay, I have one more question for you, and then I know I can see that two of my subcommittees have questions for you as well. Would you consider it an improvement to the bill if we said that someone who is running for sheriff would thereby resign from this oversight committee? Would that be an improvement to the bill?
You know, yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, it would be an improvement, but his friends would get on it. And you know how politics works as well as we do. It wouldn't solve the problem. The civilian review boards for sheriffs is not going to be the same civilian review board that you have for police. Police are not political. They're appointed. They are employees. Sheriffs are elected constitutional officers. Okay. And this bill, for the first time, will place them subservient to an appointed committee. And we don't know what the motive of these committee members will be. So we're very much concerned about the structure of this.
A couple of my subcommittee members have some questions. Delegate Price.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a question. When the witness this summer said that they did not need to be included in the Civilian Review Board legislation because there was a review every 4 years, I did giggle because I thought it was a joke. And now I see not only did he say that this summer, but we're coming back with that. And so I would just ask for a community that is being affected by potential misconduct. If the gentleman does not think that 4 years living under such conditions would be a long amount of time to have to deal with such from the people that are supposed to protect and serve.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Delegate Price and members of the committee. It's not a review of actions and what sheriffs do every 4 years. It's an election and a statement by the voters, we like what you're doing or we're not. But that doesn't mean sheriffs don't address these issues every day. And I remember when I testified on it, the election is every 4 years. That doesn't mean that the sheriffs hibernate for 4 years and then come out and say, oh, I've been doing a great job. We are constantly under scrutiny, and it's a daily thing, and sheriffs are involved daily with their community. Some sheriffs already have citizens review committees to advise them. They involve the African-American community, they involve the religious community, and others. So I want to reemphasize, it's not our position that because we're elected, this comes up every 4 years. It doesn't. It comes up every day. And then there was another layer of insulation that was put on it by the special session of the General Assembly to allow any citizen to complain to the Attorney General of Virginia to initiate an investigation on civil violations. And he can do that, and he can remedy situations with a lawsuit that follows.
Delegate Hope, do you have a question for anyone? Or?
Yeah, for Mr. Jones, I mean, this is what I'm struggling with and have been since special session. The goal and objective of civilian review boards is to provide public transparency about what's going on in law enforcement and to see if there's any bad apples, Mr. Chairman. And that's what the public needs to know. And that's why we want a civilian oversight. I would imagine most scenarios where you're investigating, it's internal. The public never has the ability to know. So if the public can't find out, you mentioned the Attorney General, that's going to have to be a pattern of abuse. That's not just a one-off or an occasional type thing. That has to be a long history of a pattern of abuse before it gets elevated. But doesn't the public have a right to know? I don't know how the public will know otherwise. Do you have other suggestion?
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Chairman Hope and members of the committee. Absolutely. And we're not taking the position that the public should know. Our members are elected officials. It doesn't get any better than a review of elected officials. And as I said, it goes on daily. The sheriffs are daily involved and engaged in their community. And, to think that, we're going to hide these investigations, we will protect complainants and we will protect people that have been falsely accused. But if there's wrongdoing, the sheriffs, we're in the showroom window for everyone to see. And that's why you see these sheriff's races, the hottest races in the localities and in the counties when they run. You always read more about the sheriff's race because it's all been out there. It's all been discussed in the public all along, every day and every week throughout the community. And that is a review. It's the ultimate review.
Mr. Jones, and I'll get back to, I know Chairman Hope probably has a follow-up. I'm going to take his follow-up and then he can go back after me. Mr. Jones, for the public to elect a new sheriff, the public has to be informed. They have to know, what's going on. And even a candidate who opposes a sheriff, if they don't know what's going on, if the public can't know what's going on, how can we have an informed electorate who, other than the public every 4 years just trying to figure it out, and the Attorney General who looks at a massive pattern of abuse, in terms of day-to-day oversight? We just passed a bill for an ombudsman for the prisons to give that kind of day-to-day oversight, to say an independent voice that says, hey, what's going on here? And that's no insult to the Department of Corrections. It's a way to check to make sure they're doing the right thing. Other than the public having to sort of guess and the Attorney General dealing with a pattern and practice, what is your day-to-day oversight? How does the public know and listen, most of your sheriffs do very good work, but the ones that don't, how is the public going to find out about it without this kind of board?
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, the sheriff is the ombudsman. We are separate. We are independent. we do answer to the public. You know, take a big city police department and have a citizen to try to call the chief. He may get through. Take a big county where the sheriff has law enforcement or not, like Fairfax, and a citizen try to call the sheriff, they'll get through. The sheriff is elected and the sheriff is responsive. And let me just point out this bill on lines 43. It gives the Civilian Review Board direct supervision over the actions of the elected constitutional officers and gives them disciplinary action over deputies. So who is the deputy going to be responding to? Is the deputy going to now respond to the Civilian Review Board, or are they going to respond to the sheriff that appointed them as a deputy sheriff? It's inherently a conflict here. And we don't see how it will work. And we honestly put together a committee of sheriffs to try to address. We went around the bond and we actually came up with language, and then we always get back to the point. The sheriff is accountable directly, and it's not just every 4 years. They're there every day. And we all read about our sheriffs in the paper. Everything that goes on is out there. It is public. It is available, and it is known in the community what these sheriffs are doing.
Mr. Jones, I'm sorry, I don't see in the bill where the Civilian Oversight Board does discipline. Maybe I missed it, and I may well have. I do see a difference between an ombudsman-like group that oversees and reports, but you make a good point about discipline. Am I missing it? Is there a place in the bill where the Civilian Review Board actually disciplines a deputy?
I'm looking at line 43 that was referenced, Mr. Chair. I'm not seeing it either.
It's at the end of line 43.
So line 43, and I don't believe this bill's been amended. Says
binding disciplinary determinations in cases that involve serious breaches of professional standards. Such disciplinary determinations may include letters of reprimand, suspension without pay, suspension with pay, demotion within the department, reassignment within the department, termination. So now you can have a Civilian Review Board to terminate a deputy sheriff that's been appointed by an elected constitutional officer, involuntary restitution, and it goes on and on.
Delegate Williams-Graves, do you have an answer to that particular question of whether the Civilian Review Board should be responsible for discipline?
Well, what I believe is that all the disciplinary recommendations should be made available to the public and then presented to the sheriff, who is the constitutional officer. And at that point, if those recommendations are made to the sheriff, it is at the sheriff's discretion as to whether or not he or she chooses to follow through with them. That, to me, also allows for the public at election time to understand how the sheriff and how the sheriff handles disciplinary action with regard to bad actors within his department. So I'm willing to take this back and take a look at these lines and offer and work on amendments to this as it would pertain to sheriff's deputies, because I see where this works for police departments that are employed by localities, and where it could be a little bit different. We may have to amend some language as it pertained to the sheriff's deputies portion of this.
I wonder, and I'm going to just throw this out to the committee, and I have not made any decision personally here. Whether in line 43, if we simply change the word binding to advisory, and we allowed the Civilian Review Board to advise all these things, to advise on, to make an advisory determination on discipline, letter of reprimand, suspension, and to make a suggestion that would be public. And then if the sheriff didn't obey that, there would be a political consequence, but they'd be able to make an advisory rather than a binding one. And I just, let me throw that out to the subcommittee and see what their thoughts are on that. Delegate Price, do you have a thought on that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I do agree with that. Because I also believe not even just for the political consequence, but to bring the conversation out into the public as much as possible. So I would also looking at the clock, Mr. Chairman, I would like to see if we can adopt such a line amendment in concept, and then see what the patron and council can come up with for full committee. And I just would like to just, Mr. Chairman, also say, just for any of those watching, this is not meant for anyone in particular, but it is really important that the conversations that you're having with bills be also including the bill patron, because some of the concerns being talked about with other people did not lead you to an amendment properly before us. And I'm not talking about this one, Mr. Chairman, but a previous one. So as conversations are happening, you know, great. But if you're not also talking with the bill patron, then we end up in a situation where we are dealing with the bill before us. And I'm happy to do that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So Delegate Williams-Graves, would you be amenable, would you consider it a friendly amendment, and understanding we can make changes with full committee, to simply change the word binding to advisory in line 43? Would you support that?
Yes, that is absolutely something I would support.
Chair.
Yes, Delegate Rasool.
Yeah, just an inquiry for council about our conversation on the amendment, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Please, go ahead, Delegate Rasool.
Mr. Chair, and I'm sorry if I'm completely missing something, but the proposed amendment that I see us talking about, and I may be wrong, is an amendment to what is already existing code. And that amendment to what is already existing code may, while I know we are trying to make sure from a sheriff's perspective, we maybe take a different track, but the already current law for existing law enforcement with regards to the Civilian Review Board, that this may actually take a step back with regards to that. That's how I read it, but I may be wrong. I would just like to ask if I'm reading that correctly.
I think that's a solid point, Delegate Rasool. And so we may have to work on this in concept and maybe make it advisory with regard only to sheriffs and not step back on law enforcement. So
Mr. Chair, that is my motion at this time, to develop that in concept by the time we get to full committee.
Mr. Chairman, I absolutely second that, and I'd like to remind everyone that we have a hard stop at 9 o'clock, and I have witnesses who have been waiting hours to speak on the bill that I have yet to present, so I would really appreciate at least 5 minutes before we have to stop. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and remember, I just seconded that motion.
Okay, thank you, Delegate Corey, and I apologize. I think yours may have to go over into the afternoon, but we can get it started.
Mr. Chairman, I cannot do that. I have 3 bills I'm presenting this afternoon.
There's a motion and a second on the floor.
Yes, there is.
All right, so let's vote on this motion. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, the motion passes. The concept that we're going to ask council to work on is to say that it's advisory with regard to sheriffs only, but not to change the law with regard to law enforcement. And with that, I will try to get as much time as I can to Delegate Corey's bill. Unless there's any
Mr. Chairman,
vital important discussion, I'd
move to report as amended.
Second.
Second.
All right, let's open up the rolls. Delegate Ronnie Campbell, are you with us? Okay, let's close the rolls.
Yes, I'm with you.
Do you have a vote?
Go with me, Chairman.
What's your vote on HB 2291?
No.
Okay, let's close the rolls. The vote is 5-3. We will now take as much time as we can on Delegate